Right there in the signing room, I watched the man who had stolen everything from me pick up his pen, look straight at me, and say, "You came here with nothing, old man. You should have stayed that way." He signed, slowly, confidently, certain that 3 years of lies had finally paid off. Then the side door opened, and the smile on his face turned to stone. "Thank you for joining Revenge Dad today. Your presence means the world to me." Where are you tuning in from? Let me know your city or country in the comments so we can connect. Please note, this narrative incorporates stylized elements for educational and creative purposes. Any similarity to actual events or names is coincidental, but the message I am conveying is incredibly useful. The Greyhound left Houston at 3:14 in the morning, and I was the only one on board who didn't sleep. I sat in the second row from the back, a window seat, my old field duffel wedged between my knees and the seat in front of me. Outside, the highway stretched flat and dark, the kind of Texas flat that goes on so long it stops feeling like a place and starts feeling like a punishment. I watched the lights of the city pull away behind the bus, the neighborhoods I had driven through for 31 years, the exit ramp I had taken every morning on my way to the office, the overpass where you could just barely see the top of the downtown skyline if you craned your neck at the right angle. I didn't crane my neck, I let it all go dark. My name is Arthur Carter. I spent 40 years reading the Earth for a living, analyzing seismic data, mapping subsurface formations, locating oil and gas deposits that no one else could find. I worked for independents for majors, for everyone from small Texas wildcatters to the upstream division of Chevron. I had a reputation. I had a house with a red oak in the front yard that my late wife Carol had planted the spring after we moved in. I had a patent, a proprietary geologic positioning technology I developed over 8 years of field research that I had been approached about licensing twice. I had a retirement account with $412,000 in it. I had a son-in-law named Julian Vance. Notice I'm using the past tense for all of those things. Julian came into our family the way a lot of charming, dangerous things do, gradually then, all at once. He met Chloe at a conference in Dallas 3 years ago. She called me the same night, her voice bright and breathless, in a way I hadn't heard since she was 16 and had just gotten her driver's license. "He's different, Dad," she said. "He actually listens." I should have asked to what. Julian was a financial broker, or had been. By the time I met him, he described himself as an independent investment strategist, which is the kind of title that sounds impressive until you try to verify it. He wore good shoes. He knew which wine to order. He asked me questions about my work with what seemed like genuine curiosity, the kind of attention that makes a man feel seen, especially a man who has spent decades in technical fields, where nobody outside the industry cares what you actually do. 6 months after the wedding, Julian came to me with an opportunity. He sat across from me at my kitchen table in Houston, the same table where Carol and I had signed the mortgage on the house, where I had helped Leo with his engineering homework, where I had read the letter announcing that my patent application had been approved. Julian placed a folder on that table and opened it with the careful enthusiasm of a man presenting something he had rehearsed. He used that phrase because I had told him once over dinner that every geologist carries a private dream, a discovery of his own, independent of any corporation, something with his name on it. Julian had listened, he had remembered, and now he was handing me a 40-page geological survey from a company called Western Basin Exploration Partners, showing a significant shale oil formation beneath a tract of land in West Texas that was allegedly going up for private lease auction within 60 days. The data looked right, not perfect. I noticed 2 anomalies in the resistivity logs, but right enough that I asked to keep the file overnight. I ran the numbers myself. I called a colleague in Midland who confirmed that the area in question had seen increased leasing activity in the past year. What I did not do was call the Texas Railroad Commission to verify that Western Basin Exploration Partners was a registered operator. That is the mistake I will carry for the rest of my life. Julian proposed we form a family, LLC Carter Family Energy Ventures, to enter the lease auction as a legal entity. The operating agreement, which ran to 61 pages and which I read in its entirety over 2 evenings, gave Julian authority as managing member to execute commercial loan agreements on behalf of the company. I thought that was standard. I thought I was protecting my family. I signed the document at a notary office on a Tuesday afternoon in November. 2 weeks later, Julian placed another document in front of me at that same kitchen table. He called it a retirement fund reallocation form, a mechanism he explained for rolling my $412,000 out of my existing 401k into the LLC as working capital, structured to avoid early withdrawal penalties. He walked me through it page by page, pointing at lines explaining terms. I signed it. What I actually signed was an early withdrawal authorization directing my entire retirement account to be liquidated and transferred to the LLC's operating account, over which Julian held sole signatory authority. The following month, he produced a one-page assignment of patent rights, which he described as a formality, a way to list the patent as a company asset for the purpose of securing a commercial loan to cover the lease entry fee. The loan, he said, would be repaid within 90 days once the lease was awarded. I signed that too. The house came last. Julian refinanced the mortgage I had almost paid off against the LLC's projected revenue. The bank, a commercial lender I had never worked with before, when Julian had selected, processed the paperwork in 11 days. By January, the LLC held my retirement savings, my patent, and the equity in my home. In February, Western Basin Exploration Partners ceased all communication. Their registered address in Midland turned out to be a mail forwarding service. Their principal geologist did not exist. The lease auction had never been real. In March, the LLC filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the kind that liquidates assets to satisfy creditors rather than restructuring them. Under Chapter 7, the bankruptcy trustee took control of everything the LLC held. The commercial lender called the mortgage. The bank moved to foreclose. Julian told me he was devastated. He sat in my living room, the living room I was losing, and told me the market had turned, the geology had been misrepresented to him as well, and that he was as much a victim as I was. He looked me in the eye when he said it. I remember thinking that he was either the best liar I had ever encountered or a genuinely broken man. It took me 6 more weeks to confirm which one. Chloe stopped returning my calls the day after the foreclosure notice arrived, a text message, 2 lines. Dad, I'm so sorry. Please don't call me for a while. That was it. 40 years of raising that girl, teaching her to ride a bike in the parking lot of a church on Westheimer, driving her to every art class, every portfolio review, sitting front row at her first graphic design exhibition. And I got 2 lines and a period. I packed what I could fit in 1 duffel and 1 rolling bag. The bank's representative, a young man in a beige polo shirt, who could not have been older than 26, walked through the house with a clipboard while I carried my bags to the front door. He wasn't unkind, he was just doing his job. That made it worse somehow. I stood on the front porch for a long moment and looked at the red oak Carol had planted. It was April, and the tree was just starting to leaf out that pale spring green that only lasts about 2 weeks before it deepens into summer. Carol had loved that particular shade. I picked up my bags and walked to the bus station. The Greyhound moved through the dark, and I sat with my hands folded in my lap and did the thing that geologists do when everything goes wrong. I looked for the fault line. Not in the earth this time, in myself. Somewhere between the resistivity anomalies I noticed and chose to overlook, and the notary office on a Tuesday afternoon, and the kitchen table where I signed my name 4 times somewhere in that sequence, was the exact moment the ground beneath me had given way. I found it. The moment I decided that wanting something badly enough was the same as knowing it was real. My phone buzzed once in my jacket pocket. I didn't take it out. The lights of Texas were gone now, and the highway ahead was dark and straight and going somewhere I hadn't planned on going. That was all right. I didn't have anywhere else to be. The bus pulled into Fresno at 6:30 in the evening, and Leo was already there. He was leaning against the hood of his truck in the pickup lane, a dusty white Ford F-15. With a cracked side mirror that he had been meaning to replace for 2 years or so, he told me later. He was wearing his work clothes, a gray Henley and canvas pants with a smear of machine grease on the left knee, which meant he had driven straight from the job site. He didn't wave when he saw me come through the glass doors. He just pushed off the hood and walked over, took my rolling bag out of my hand, without asking, and loaded it into the truck bed. That was Leo. He had never been a talker. He showed up instead. We drove south on the 99 through the long, flat corridor of the Central Valley, past almond orchards and pistachio groves, and the occasional dairy operation that announced itself well before you could see it. The sun was going down on our right, pressing orange light across the fields in long, low streaks. Leo had the radio on low, a country station playing something I didn't recognize, and neither of us said much for the first 20 minutes. Then Leo said, "You eat anything today?" Coffee," I said. Bus station had a vending machine. He made a sound that was not quite a word, and took the next exit toward a diner he apparently knew. We sat in a vinyl booth under fluorescent lights and ordered the kind of meal that exists specifically for people who need to eat, without thinking about it. Eggs toast, hash browns, coffee, that came in a white ceramic mug and got refilled without being asked. Leo ate steadily. I ate slowly. Outside the window, a tractor was moving through a field, in the last of the light its headlamps cutting pale lines through the dusk. "I'm not going to ask you what happened," Leo said, not looking up from his plate. "I read enough of it in the court filings." My fork stopped moving. "You pulled the filings week ago." He tore a piece of toast in half. "Wanted to know what I was dealing with before you got here." He finally looked up. "Julian's name is all over them, Dad." "I know. Does Chloe know?" I set my fork down. The coffee mug was warm in my hands and I held it the way you hold something when you need something solid to hold. "She sent me 2 lines of text and stopped answering her phone," I said. "So either she doesn't know or she knows and she's made her choice." Leo's jaw tightened. He looked back down at his plate. "She'll come around." "Maybe," I said. "But that's not what I'm thinking about right now." He didn't push it. That was the other thing about Leo. He knew when a subject was a door and when it was a wall, and he didn't throw himself at walls. His apartment was on the 2nd floor of a 2-story complex in Tulare, a small city about 30 miles south of Fresno that existed primarily to service the agricultural operations surrounding it. The apartment was clean and deliberately spare, a couch, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, bookshelves made from planks, and concrete blocks loaded with engineering manuals, and a few paperback novels with broken spines. The kind of place a practical man makes livable without making fussy. He had set up the pull-out sofa in the living room, with fresh sheets and a spare pillow. A clean towel was folded on the armrest. "Bathroom's yours until 7, he said, setting my bag near the couch. "I'm out the door by 7:15. "I'll be up before 6, I said. He nodded as though that was the only acceptable answer. "There's food in the fridge, nothing special. Coffee maker's on the counter, filters are in the cabinet above it." He paused at the hallway entrance. "You need anything else tonight?" What I needed was not something a refrigerator or a coffee maker could provide, but Leo had driven to Fresno after a full workday and made room for me in his life without being asked, and that was worth more than anything I could think to say. "I'm good," I said. "Thank you, son." He gave me a single nod and went to his room. I sat on the edge of the pullout and looked at my hands for a while. A petroleum geologist's hands calloused along the palm from years of field equipment, a faded scar on my right index finger from a core sample accident in the Permian Basin in 2007. 40 years of reading the earth, and I had not seen the thing happening directly under my own feet. I was still sitting there when Leo came back out 20 minutes later, in a clean t-shirt, carrying 2 bottles of beer. He handed me one, sat in the chair across from me, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "There's something I want to run by you," he said, "and I want you to hear it out before you say anything." I took a drink of the beer. "All right, I know a woman. She runs an almond operation about 45 minutes east of here, out toward the foothills. 500 acres, maybe more. I did some equipment work for her irrigation system last fall. Name's Sienna Brooks." He turned the bottle in his hands. "She's 28. She's been running the place alone since her father passed 3 years ago. Accident on the highway." "That's young," I said. "Yeah, well." He paused. "She's also in a wheelchair. Has been since the accident. But don't let that fool you. I've seen her out in those fields at 6 in the morning, in a custom off-road chair, running drone surveys on her tree rows, before most people have had breakfast. She's not looking for sympathy. She's looking for someone who knows what they're doing." I set my beer down. "What does she need?" "Water." Leo said it the way people in the Central Valley say it, not as a simple noun, but as a problem with weight behind it. The kind of weight that has been building for 20 years of drought cycles and over-allocated aquifers and state water boards cutting allocations to surface right holders. She's been running on her existing well, but the water table's dropped. The well's not pulling enough to keep her trees through a full irrigation cycle. She loses this summer, she could lose the whole crop, maybe the farm. "She needs a new well drilled," I said. "She needs somebody to find where to drill it." He looked at me steadily. "Deep aquifer work, seismic analysis? You've done it before, I know you have. I've read your papers." I had done it before. In the Permian, in the Anadarko, once in a consulting capacity for a municipal water district in New Mexico. The techniques were not identical to petroleum exploration, but the instrumentation overlapped substantially, and the interpretive principles were the same: read the rock, understand the structure, find what's hiding in the dark. I don't have my equipment, I said. Everything I owned went into the LLC. I know. Leo reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a printout I realized of an email exchange. UC Davis has a geosciences extension program in Fresno. I reached out to a professor there last week. Dr. Harmon, he runs their applied geophysics lab. He's willing to loan portable seismic equipment on a consulting basis if the project has academic value. A deep aquifer survey in a water-stressed agricultural zone qualifies. I looked at my son for a long moment. He had done all of this before I arrived, before I had even agreed to anything. Leo, I said. She's not doing you a favor, he said quickly as if he had anticipated the exact shape of my resistance. She needs a geologist. You're a geologist. You both need something the other one has. That's not charity. That's just how work works. I picked up the printout and read through the email exchange. Dr. Harmon's language was precise and collegial, the language of a man who understood what portable seismic arrays could do in the right hands. The equipment list included a 24-channel land streamer, a portable seismograph unit, and a set of geophones adequate for surveying depths down to 600 feet. 600 feet was deep enough to find a confined aquifer. It was also deep enough to find other things. I set the paper down on the cushion beside me. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the street below, and somewhere in the complex, a television was playing too loud. "Tell her I'll be there at 6, I said. Leo allowed himself the smallest version of a smile, a slight shift at the corner of his mouth there, and gone in less than a second. "She said 6:30, he said. "But she'll be in the field by 6. I already told her you'd be early." I finished the beer and lay back on the pullout and stared at the ceiling of my son's apartment in Tulare, California. Everything I had built in Houston was gone. My house, my savings, my patent, my professional, standing all of it pulled under by a man I had welcomed into my family and trusted with my signature. But I was still a geologist. Julian Vance could take a lot of things from me. He could not take 40 years of knowing how to read the earth. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. Leo dropped me at the farm gate at 10 minutes before 6. The sky was still that particular shade of dark blue that comes just before sunrise, not night anymore, but not morning. Yet, either a color that doesn't have a clean name in English. The gate itself was a simple ranch gate, powder-coated steel, painted dark green, and beyond it, a gravel road ran straight through the first rows of almond trees and disappeared into the gray. I could smell irrigation water and turned earth and something faintly sweet that I eventually identified as the tail end of almond blossom season. The trees were mostly leafed out now, small green fruit just beginning to set, but a few late flowers still held on here and there, like they hadn't gotten the message. I told Leo I'd call him when I needed a ride back. He said don't worry about it, and drove off before I could argue. I stood at the gate with my field notebook under my arm and waited. I did not wait long. The sound came first, a low electric hum, combined with the soft crunch of tires on compacted dirt. Then headlights low and wide set, moving through the tree rows from the east end of the property. Not a standard vehicle. The chassis sat lower than a truck, but wider than a utility cart, with 4 oversized tires that looked like they belonged on something designed for rough terrain. The whole rig was custom. I could see that even in the half-dark, modified with hand controls, on a console mounted to the left of the steering column, and a roll bar fitted with LED work lights that swept a clean path through the orchard rows. The vehicle stopped on the other side of the gate. The driver's window came down. "You're early," she said. "You said 6:30, I said. "It's not 6:30. It's also not 6. She pushed a button on the console and the gate swung inward on a motorized hinge. "Come around. There's a passenger bar on the right side. Grab it when we go over the irrigation furrows. They're deep this time of year." I walked around and pulled myself up into the passenger seat. The vehicle moved before I had fully settled, which told me something about how Sienna Brooks operated. She did not wait for people to get comfortable. In the growing light, I got my first real look at her. She was younger than I had pictured 28, Leo had said, but she carried herself with the focused stillness of someone twice that age. Dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, no makeup, a flannel shirt over a thermal layer, with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, despite the morning chill. Her hands on the controls were capable and unhurried, the hands of someone who had learned this particular machine, the way a pianist learns an instrument, not by thinking about it anymore, just by doing it. She did not look at me when she spoke. She was watching the tree rows. "Leo tells me you're a petroleum geologist," she said, 40 years in the field. "That's right. He also tells me you've done groundwater work." "Consulting basis," I said. "New Mexico 2014, Municipal Aquifer Survey for a water district in Eddy County, and some informal work in the Permian when operators needed to know what they were drilling through before they hit pay zone." She nodded a single precise movement. "My existing well is pulling from the upper Tulare Formation, 160 feet down. Last summer, it couldn't sustain pressure through a full drip irrigation cycle for more than 11 days straight. I lost about 30 acres of first-year trees on the east block." She said it without emotion, the way you report a fact that hurts too much to say with feeling. "This summer will be worse if I don't find a deeper source." "What's your acreage total?" I asked. 512 planted, another 60 in fallow on the north end that I'm not touching until I have water to support it. She cut the wheel smoothly to avoid a low-hanging branch. "The well driller my neighbor uses says there's a confined aquifer in the Corcoran clay layer, somewhere between 400 and 600 feet down. He's willing to drill, but he needs a target. He says he's not going to sink a $60,000 well on a guess." "He's right not to," I said. "You need seismic data first, refraction survey at minimum reflection if we want confidence on the depth to the clay layer." "Can you do that?" "I have access to equipment through UC Davis. Leo arranged it." I paused. "I'll need to run transects across the full property, east to west, then north to south. Probably 3 days of field work to get data I'd trust." She was quiet for a moment. We had reached the east block she had mentioned. I could see the gap in the canopy where the dead trees had been removed, rows of bare ground between the surviving ones. The kind of loss that leaves a visible scar in an orchard, the same way it does in anything else. 30 acres, I said quietly. 29.4, she said. I counted. We sat there for a moment in the idling vehicle looking at the empty rows in the early light. Then she turned to look at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark brown and entirely steady. She was not asking for my sympathy. She was measuring me the same way I had been measured at the gate by the sound of her tires and the speed of her vehicle before I had even seen her face. "I don't need someone who feels sorry for the dead trees," she said. "I need someone who can find water for the ones that are still alive. Can you do that or not?" "Yes," I said. "I can do that." She held my gaze for another 2 seconds, not dramatically, just long enough to decide something, and then she turned back to the controls. "Good. I'll show you the existing well site and the property boundary markers this morning. You can start transect planning this afternoon." She drove us back through the orchard toward a cluster of low buildings near the center of the property. A main house, a barn, a smaller structure that appeared to be a combination, equipment storage, and office. As we pulled up, a man emerged from the barn doorway. He was somewhere in his late 50s, built like someone who had spent those decades doing physical work that never quite stopped. Wide shoulders, large hands, a face weathered to the texture of good leather. He was wearing a canvas work jacket and holding a coffee thermos. And the way he was standing weight slightly forward, arms loose at his sides, was the posture of a man who had already decided he didn't like something and was waiting to see if he was right. Sienna stopped the vehicle. "Dale," she said, "this is Arthur Carter. He's the geologist Leo sent." Dale Pruitt looked at me the way a border collie looks at an unfamiliar vehicle coming up the drive. Not hostile exactly, but not prepared to stand down either. He gave me a single nod that communicated approximately nothing. "Morning," I said. He said. Sienna climbed out of the vehicle with the practiced efficiency of someone who had long since stopped performing the transition. For an audience, a lateral transfer to a narrower powered chair that was waiting beside the building, executed in about 4 seconds without comment or drama. She moved through the side door of the office building without looking back, which I took as an invitation to follow. I moved toward the door. Dale stepped into my path, not blocking it, not quite, but occupying the space in a way that made me stop. "She hired a lot of people since her father passed," he said. His voice was low and flat, the voice of a man who chose his words the way you choose tools, only the ones you actually need. Most of them had good intentions. "I'm sure they did," I said. Most of them didn't stay. He looked at me steadily. Water consultants, business advisors, a couple of attorneys. They came in with their folders and their opinions and their sorry for your loss faces, and they left her with less than she started with. I met his eyes. "I'm not here for intentions," I said. "I'm here to find water." Dale looked at me for another moment. Then he took a drink from his thermos and stepped aside. Inside the small office, Sienna had a topographic map of the property spread across a work table, weighted at the corners with field rocks. She was already pointing to the northeast quadrant when I came through the door. "The existing well is here," she said. "The dry zone from last summer starts about 200 yards east of it. If the confined aquifer is where the driller thinks it is, it should run under this whole section." She traced a line with her finger. "But I need to know if there are structural breaks in the clay layer that might make the pressure inconsistent." I leaned over the map. The topography was what I expected for this part of the valley, nearly flat at the surface, concealing a complex sequence of alluvial deposits and lacustrine sediments below. The Corcoran clay, a regional aquitard that separated the upper and lower aquifer systems throughout much of the San Joaquin Valley, was the key. If it was intact and continuous under this property, a well drilled into the lower aquifer would have good confined pressure. If it was fractured or absent in places, the pressure would be unreliable. I needed to know which one. I straightened up and looked at the map for another moment. Then I pulled out my field notebook and began writing down transect coordinates. Outside, I heard Dale Pruitt moving equipment in the barn, the slow, deliberate sound of a man who was still making up his mind. There is a particular kind of quiet that exists only in agricultural land at first light, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of things growing of water, moving through root systems underground, of 1,000 biological processes happening just below the threshold of human hearing. I had worked in oil fields and desert basins and offshore platforms where the noise never stopped. But here, walking the east transect line of the Brooks farm, with a set of geophones in a canvas bag over my shoulder, and the portable seismograph unit strapped to a hand truck behind me, I understood for the first time why a person might choose to stay in a place like this, even when everything else fell apart. It had taken 11 days to run the full grid. The equipment from UC Davis performed better than I had expected. The 24-channel Landstreamer was newer than anything I had used in my last consulting job, and Dr. Harmon's graduate student, a quiet young man named Travis, who drove out from Fresno twice to help me set up the geophone arrays, had calibrated the seismograph with more precision than most field technicians I had worked with in the petroleum sector. We ran east-west transects first, then north-south, then a diagonal set across the northeast quadrant, where the water table data suggested the Corcoran clay might be thinnest. I processed the data each evening on a laptop Leo had lent me, running the refraction analysis first to get the velocity model, then the reflection processing to image the subsurface structure. The Corcoran clay showed up clearly on the reflection profiles, a strong continuous reflector at an average depth of 480 feet across most of the property, exactly where the well driller had predicted. Beneath it, the lower aquifer showed good acoustic impedance contrast, which meant the confined pressure system was likely intact. By the end of the second week, I had a target. A confined aquifer zone in the lower Tulare Formation, 490 to 530 feet below the surface, running beneath the north-central block of the property. I drew the recommended well location on the topographic map with a red circle and felt for the first time since Houston the specific satisfaction of having read the Earth correctly. That should have been the end of it. But on the morning of the 11th day running the last diagonal transect across the far eastern corner of the property, the section Sienna kept fallow, 60 acres of dry grass and scattered native scrub that nobody had farmed in years. The seismograph produced a reflection profile that stopped me where I stood. I pulled the display unit from the hand truck and stared at it. The Corcoran clay was still there right where it should be, a clean reflector at 470 feet. But beneath it, instead of the relatively uniform acoustic signature of a water-saturated sandstone, the lower formation showed a pronounced structural anomaly, a dome-shaped arch in the rock layers with a corresponding bright spot on the amplitude display that in 40 years of reading seismic data, I had learned to associate with one thing and one thing only, a hydrocarbon trap. The structure was textbook an anticlinal dome, the kind of geometry that causes buoyant oil and gas to migrate upward through permeable rock and collect beneath an impermeable cap. The bright spot indicated acoustic impedance contrast consistent with a gas cap over a liquid hydrocarbon accumulation. The trap appeared to extend across roughly 40 acres of the fallow section, potentially more. I ran the analysis 3 times. I changed the processing parameters twice to make sure I wasn't seeing an artifact of the refraction model the anomaly held. I sat down on the overturned geophone case and looked at the fallow field around me, dry grass bending in a light morning wind, a red-tailed hawk riding a thermal somewhere above the tree line, the distant hum of Sienna's irrigation pumps running their morning cycle to the west. Everything quiet and ordinary on the surface, and 40 feet, no, 470 feet beneath it, a geological structure that did not belong to the landscape of water. Scarcity and drought stress that I had been hired to address. That was when I did the thing I told myself I was doing, only to confirm a technical point. I opened my field bag and took out the folder I had carried with me from Houston. I had not looked at it since I left, had not been able to look at it the way you cannot look directly at the site of an accident for a while after it happens. Inside was a copy of the geological survey Julian had presented to me at my kitchen table, the survey that had convinced me to sign my name 4 times and lose everything I had built. I spread it open on my knee and found the subsurface structure map on page 17. My hands went still. The anticlinal feature on page 17 of Julian's fraudulent survey was oriented north-northeast to south-southwest, with a crest elevation relative to the formation top that the survey described as consistent with a viable trap geometry for shale-associated oil accumulation. The coordinates listed in the survey placed this feature in West Texas, in a county I had looked up on a map and confirmed existed. What I was looking at on my seismograph screen was oriented north-northeast to south-southwest, with a crest elevation relative to the Corcoran cap that was consistent with a viable trap geometry for conventional oil accumulation in a clastic reservoir. The coordinates were different. The state was different. The formation names were different. The geometry was identical. Not similar, not comparable. Identical down to the aspect ratio of the dome and the lateral extent of the bright spot amplitude anomaly. Julian had not invented a geological feature to sell me a fictional investment. He had found a real one here beneath this ground, on this property, and he had copied it. Changed the coordinates, changed the formation, names, changed the state. But the structure he had used to convince me that there was something extraordinary underground was not a fabrication. It was a description of what was right beneath my feet. I sat very still in the dry grass of Sienna Brooks's fallow field and let that understanding move through me, the way seismic energy moves through rock, not all at once, but in waves, each one carrying more information than the last. Julian had known about this deposit before he came to me. He had obtained data from this property, detailed accurate subsurface data, and used it to construct a story, compelling enough to make a 40-year geologist sign over his life savings. He had needed money, and he had needed it for a specific purpose. Not for a West Texas oil play that didn't exist. For this. For whatever was sitting in the ground beneath 60 acres of fallow California farmland. The irrigation pumps hummed in the distance. The hawk circled and dropped out of sight below the tree line. I folded the survey carefully and put it back in the folder. I closed the seismograph display. I sat there for a long moment, with my hands on my knees looking at the ground between my boots. Then I picked up the geophone case and the hand truck and walked back toward the farm buildings. I needed to find Sienna, and I needed to think very carefully about how to say what I had to say, because there was no version of this conversation that did not change everything. I was halfway across the east block when I heard the electric hum of her vehicle behind me. She pulled up alongside me and stopped. The morning light was full now, warm and flat across the orchard rows, turning the young almond leaves a color somewhere between green and gold. She looked at the expression on my face. "You found water," she said. I stopped walking. I looked at her, at the steadiness in her eyes, the capable set of her hands on the controls, the way she was already reading my face, the way I read a seismic profile looking for what the data actually said beneath the surface noise. "Not exactly," I said. I held up the folder. "Sienna, we need to talk." She did not take me back to the office. She drove us to the far end of the north block instead, where a single almond tree stood apart from the rest at the edge of the fallow section, older than the others, wider in the trunk, with branches that had been trained and retrained over decades into a shape that only long cultivation produces. Sienna stopped the vehicle beneath it and cut the motor. The morning was fully bright now, and the light came through the leaves in shifting pieces. She held out her hand for the folder. I gave it to her. She opened it on her lap and looked at the subsurface structure map on page 17 for a long time without speaking. Her expression did not change in any dramatic way. No sharp intake of breath, no widening of the eyes. What changed was something more precise. A small tightening at the corners of her mouth, a stillness in her hands that was different from her usual controlled stillness. The kind that comes not from discipline, but from the body's response to something it recognizes before the mind catches up. "Tell me what I'm looking at," she said. "The colored contours on that map show the top of a subsurface geological structure," I said. "A dome-shaped arch in the rock formations, the kind of geometry that traps oil and gas underground. And this is supposed to be in West Texas." According to the document, yes. The coordinates on page 3 place it in Reeves County. I checked that county on a map when Julian first showed me this. It exists. The formation names on page 12 are real formation names used in West Texas plays. She looked up at me. But the structure itself, the shape, the dimensions, the amplitude signature, is identical to what I found this morning in your fallow section. Not similar, identical. I leaned forward slightly. "Sienna, someone with access to accurate geological data from this property used that data to construct a fictional investment prospectus. They changed the location, they changed the formation names, but they could not change the geometry, because the geometry is what makes it valuable, and they needed that to be real in order to be convincing." She closed the folder slowly. Her jaw was tight and a muscle moved in her cheek just once, the way it does when someone is pressing something down that wants to come up. Her fingers pressed flat against the folder cover. "How much?" she said. "Conservative estimate based on the trap volume and a standard recovery factor for this type of reservoir, somewhere between $8 and $12 million in recoverable value. Possibly more, depending on what the full drill confirms." She breathed out through her nose. It was not a sound of excitement. It was the sound of someone absorbing a blow that they had half expected but had hoped would not land. "The man who showed you this document," she said. "Tell me about him." So I did. I told her about Julian, about the conference in Dallas, about the good shoes and the right wine and the questions that felt like genuine curiosity, about the kitchen table in Houston and the 4 signatures, about the early withdrawal authorization and the assignment of patent rights, and the 61-page operating agreement with the clause that handed Julian signatory authority over everything. About the February morning when Western Basin Exploration Partners went silent and I started making phone calls that nobody answered. I told her about standing on my front porch watching the bank representative walk through my house with a clipboard, about the text message from Chloe, about the Greyhound at 3:14 in the morning. Sienna listened to all of it without interrupting once. She sat very straight in her chair, her hands folded in her lap over the closed folder, her eyes fixed on the middle distance somewhere beyond the old almond tree. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and the quiet had weight to it. Not emptiness, but the specific gravity of a person thinking through something they have been circling for a long time without being able to name it. 3 years ago, she said finally, my father was driving home from Bakersfield on Route 33. He used that road twice a month for years. He knew every curve. She paused. The accident investigator said he went off the road on a straightaway my father had driven 100 times. They called it driver inattention. Her voice was level and precise, the way a person's voice gets when they have said a thing so many times in their own head that it no longer sounds like grief, only like fact. His field journal was in the truck. He kept everything in it, survey notes, coordinate logs, soil samples, everything going back 15 years. It wasn't recovered at the scene. I felt something cold move through my chest. The journal was gone, I said. The investigator said it probably burned. The truck caught fire. She looked at me directly. But my father kept a secondary copy of his coordinate logs in a waterproof case in the truck bed. That was recovered, damaged but readable. I gave it to Rebecca Yoon. She's an attorney in Fresno. She handled my father's estate for safekeeping. I never thought about it again because I had a farm to keep alive, and I didn't have the bandwidth to think about anything that wasn't immediately in front of me. She reached out and put one finger on the folder in her lap. His notes described a geological feature he had identified in the fallow section. He had been meaning to have it formally assessed. He said in his last journal entry that the land might have more value than the almonds. Her finger pressed down slightly on the folder. He wrote that entry 4 days before he died. We sat with that for a moment. The almond leaves moved above us. Somewhere across the property, Dale's tractor started up the low diesel rumble, carrying across the flat morning air. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to hear it as a question, not an accusation." "Ask it. Is there any chance your father shared his geological findings with anyone outside the family? Old business contact, a land broker, anyone who might have had reason to pass that information along?" Sienna thought about this with the same careful steadiness she brought to everything. "He talked to a land surveyor about 18 months before the accident," she said. "A young man came out twice. My father liked him, said he was sharp, asked good questions." She stopped, a beat of silence. Then her chin lifted slightly and something shifted behind her eyes. Not shock exactly, but recognition. The expression of a person watching two things that have always been separate suddenly occupied the same space. He was a financial analyst, that's what the card said. But he described himself as doing land valuation work. I never saw him again after the second visit. "Do you remember his name?" She shook her head slowly, jaw tight. "I didn't pay attention. I was 25. I was worried about the water allocation for that season. I let my father handle it." Her hands tightened on the folder until her knuckles showed white against her skin. "I let my father handle it," she said again, and this time the words had a different sound. Not information, but something she was pressing into herself. Something that hurt in a very specific way. "Sienna," I kept my voice even, "this is not something you caused." "I know that." She said it quickly and firmly, the way you say a thing you believe intellectually, but have not yet finished feeling. Then she looked at me with an expression I recognized, not because I had seen it on her face before, but because I had felt it on my own in the weeks after Houston. The expression of a person who has lost something they can't get back and is deciding in real time whether to collapse under that or turn it into something else. She turned it into something else. "All right," she said. Her voice was back to that flat operational clarity. "Here is what I need to know. If Julian Vance has the original coordinate data from my father's journal and he knows what's under this land, what is he planning to do with that information?" "He needs the land," I said. "The geological data is worthless without surface access and mineral rights. He can't extract anything unless he owns or controls the property. He'd need to buy it, or force a sale." I looked at her. "You said yourself you're carrying debt from last year's crop loss. If your water situation doesn't improve, how long before the bank starts asking questions?" Her expression tightened. 2 seasons, maybe 3. "Julian knows that," I said. "He's patient. He's been patient for 3 years already." She nodded slowly, taking that in. The tractor sound had faded. The farm was quiet around us, and the quiet felt different now. Not peaceful, but watchful, as if the land itself understood what was being said about it. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She looked out at the fallow section, 60 acres of dry grass and hidden geology, her father's last entry, a decade and a half, of survey notes that a young man with good questions had read and quietly walked away with. "I want to keep this between us for now," she said. "Nobody else knows about the deposit. Leo knows I found water. Dale knows I've been running surveys. Nobody knows about the structure. Then it stays that way." She handed the folder back to me. "And I want you to help me figure out what to do next." She met my eyes and her gaze was steady and deliberate, and entirely without sentiment. "Not because I trust you completely. I don't trust anyone completely right now. But because you came here with nothing and you're showing me everything, and in my experience that is the rarest thing a person can do." I took the folder. "I understand." "Good." She started the vehicle motor. "We have a well site to mark before noon, and I have a drone survey to run before the wind picks up. We'll talk more tonight." She turned the vehicle back toward the farm buildings, and I held the folder in my lap and watched the fallow section recede behind us. 60 acres of dry grass above a geological feature worth $10 million, sitting undisturbed in the California earth, waiting for someone to decide what it meant. That evening, after the drone survey was done, and Dale had locked up the equipment barn, and the farm had gone quiet, I sat at the kitchen table in the main house where Sienna had invited me to stay for dinner. She put a bowl of soup in front of me without ceremony and sat across the table. "My father's name was George," she said. It was the first time she had said his name out loud to me. I understood that it was a form of introduction, that she was letting me into something she did not open for most people. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," I said. "He was," she said. Then she picked up her spoon and we ate, and outside the valley settled into its long, dry summer dark. He knocked at 5 in the morning, not at the main house door, at the window of the small room off the equipment barn where Sienna had set me up, with a cot and a lamp and a power strip for the laptop. The knock was 3 times deliberate and unhurried, the kind of knock that expects to be answered, because the person doing it has already decided they are going to wait as long as it takes. I had been awake for 20 minutes anyway. I pulled on my boots and opened the door. Dale Pruitt was standing in the pre-dawn dark with 2 enamel mugs of coffee, the kind of mugs that have been washed 10,000 times and still carry the ghost of old stains. He held one out to me without a word. I took it. He jerked his chin toward the wooden bench along the outside wall of the barn, and we both sat down. For about 2 minutes, neither of us said anything. The farm was dark and cool around us, the almond trees reduced to black shapes against a sky that was just beginning to think about going gray. Somewhere out past the north fence, a coyote called once and did not repeat itself. Dale drank his coffee and looked at the tree line, and I did the same. Then he said, "I've been working this land for 19 years. "Leo mentioned you'd been here a while," I said. "George Brooks hired me the spring after he bought the East Block." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I was between jobs, had a bad situation with a previous employer. Doesn't matter what. George didn't ask about it. He showed me the property, told me what he needed, and said the pay was fair if the work was good. Turned out he was right about both." He paused. "I was here when Sienna was learning to drive the irrigation truck. I was here when her mother left. I was here when George died." He said that last part without inflection, the way you say a true thing that has been true for long enough that the pain of it has been compressed into something harder and less visible. "I've seen a lot of people come through that gate with ideas about this place." "I know," I said. "You told me. I'm telling you again." He looked at me sideways. "Because what I said at the gate was a warning. What I'm saying now is different." I turned my mug in my hands and waited. "Something happened last week," he said. "Wednesday late afternoon. I was running the irrigation check on the north line. The drip emitters on the 3rd row from the fence have been running inconsistent. I've been monitoring them manually." He set his mug down on the bench beside him. "When I came back through the north access road, I found something that didn't belong." "What kind of something?" He stood up without answering and jerked his chin again. "Follow me." I set my mug down and followed him around the back of the barn and out through the gate in the north fence onto the unpaved access road that ran along the property boundary. The sky was lighter out here, the open ground giving the gray more room to spread. Dale walked about 100 yards up the road and stopped. He pointed at the ground. Even in the low light, I could see what he was indicating, a section of the road's soft shoulder, where the dirt was finer than the gravel surface, and in that dirt footprints. Several of them overlapping in a way that suggested someone standing in one place for a period of time, rather than passing through. The prints showed a smooth, flat sole with a narrow heel, not a work boot, not a sneaker, a dress shoe or something close to it. "Size 11, maybe 11 and a half, I said. "That's what I figured." Dale crouched and pointed to a spot about 3 feet off the road, where the native grass was flattened in a rough oval. "Someone stood here long enough to mat that down. And here?" He moved 6 feet further along the fence line and pointed to a broken stem on a scrub oak branch at about chest height. This was bent back and snapped, not by wind, by a person pushing through. I looked at the broken stem. The break was clean at the base, the kind of break you get when someone forces a branch aside to see around it, rather than breaking it off entirely. "What's on the other side of this fence from here?" I asked. "The fallow section," Dale said. "Eastern corner, right about where you were running that last survey transect." I felt the back of my neck go cold. "This is the 3rd time," Dale said, straightening up. "First time was 10 days ago. I found a cigarette butt on the south access road near the equipment gate. Not a brand anyone on this property smokes. Second time was last Thursday. Tire tracks on the fire road that runs along the east boundary. Tread pattern wasn't any of our vehicles." He looked at me steadily. I didn't say anything, because I wasn't sure if it was just trespassers. We get people coming through, sometimes hunters' kids from town. but 3 times in 2 weeks, always near the fallow section, always after dark or near dark. He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. Someone is watching that part of the land specifically. They're not hunters, I said. No, Dale said. They're not. He threw the stone into the grass and watched it disappear. You want to tell me what's in that section that someone's willing to drive out here 3 times to look at? I looked at him, the weathered face, the careful eyes, the 19 years of watching this land, and the people who came to it. I thought about what Sienna had said the night before, not because I trust you completely. I don't trust anyone completely right now, but because you came here with nothing and you're showing me everything. I need to talk to Sienna before I tell you anything, I said. Not because I don't think you should know, because it's her land and it's her call. Dale looked at me for a long moment with the same evaluating steadiness he had used at the gate on my first morning. Then he nodded once slowly, the nod of a man who has decided that the answer he just received, while not the one he wanted, was the right kind of answer. George used to say the same thing, he said. Whenever something complicated came up, he'd say, "This is Sienna's land, her call." He picked up his coffee mug from where he'd left it on a fence post. He said it even when she was 12 years old. We walked back to the barn in the early light. Sienna was already in the equipment yard. When we came through the gate, she had her drone case open on the work table outside and was running a pre-flight check on the sensors, her fingers moving over the equipment with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this procedure so many times it lived in her hands rather than her head. She looked up when she heard us. She read something in my face because she closed the drone case and said to Dale without preamble, "We need to have a conversation, all 3 of us." Dale set his mug on the table and pulled out a chair. Sienna looked at him for a moment, and in that look, I saw something pass between them that had been passing between them for years. The shorthand of 2 people who have worked the same ground through enough seasons that they have learned each other's silences as well as each other's words. Then she said, "Someone's been watching the fallow section." 3 times in 2 weeks, Dale said. I know. He leaned forward on the table. I didn't say anything because I was trying to figure out if it was my problem or everyone's problem. "It's everyone's problem," Sienna said, "and it started before Arthur arrived." She looked at me. Tell him enough." So I told Dale the shape of it, not every detail, but the load-bearing pieces, the fraudulent geological survey, the money, the structural match between what Julian had shown me in Houston and what I had found in the fallow section, that someone had apparently been watching the land to track what was being discovered there. Dale listened without moving. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, with his elbows on his knees, turning his coffee mug in slow rotations. "The man who took your money," he said finally, "he's coming for this land." "That's what I believe," I said. Dale set the mug down flat on the table, a deliberate sound. "Then we don't give it to him." He looked at Sienna. "What do you need from me?" Sienna leaned forward in her chair. "Right now, I need you to keep watching that north fence line. I need to know every time someone comes near that section, and I need you not to say a word to anyone, not the delivery drivers, not the well driller when he comes, not anyone." "Done," Dale said without hesitation, without qualification, the way a man agrees to something that does not require him to think about whether he's willing only about what exactly is being asked. He picked up both empty mugs and went inside to refill them, and I heard the sound of the kitchen faucet running and cabinet doors opening and the ordinary morning sounds of a working farm starting its day. Sienna watched him go. Then she looked at me, and the expression on her face was not relief exactly. It was something quieter and more complicated, the expression of a person who has been carrying something alone and has just set a small portion of it down in a place where it will be kept safely. "He won't tell anyone," she said. "He never has." "I know," I said. And then, because it seemed like the right thing to say and the true thing, "Your father chose well when he hired him." She looked at the gate Dale had gone through. Her chin lifted slightly and her throat moved. Then she picked up her drone case and set it back on the table and resumed her pre-flight check. "We have water to find," she said, "and a well site to mark before the driller comes Friday." Outside the north fence, the fallow section lay quiet in the morning light, 60 acres of dry grass and buried geology, and somebody else's footprints pressed into the soft dirt at the edge of the road. Leo arrived on a Friday evening with a 6-pack of pale ale and a folder of his own. He set both on the kitchen table, without explanation, pulled out a chair, and looked around at the three of us, me, Sienna, Dale, with the expression of a man who has been thinking hard about something for several days, and is ready to stop thinking and start talking. He had driven up from Tulare after his shift, still in his work clothes, and there was a smear of hydraulic fluid on his left forearm that he had not bothered to wipe off. "I've been running numbers," he said, "on the farm's debt position and the water situation. I wanted to understand what Julian would actually know if he was watching this place." Sienna looked at him. And if I were a guy who had been tracking this property for 3 years, waiting for the right moment, this is the moment. He opened the folder and spread 3 pages on the table. "Your operating loan comes up for review in October. The crop yield projections for this season are down 18% from last year because of the irrigation shortfall. The existing well output is documented in county records. Anyone who knows where to look can pull the water allocation filings and see that you're running below sustainable levels." He tapped the pages. "On paper, the Brooks farm looks like it's 6 months from a forced sale." "That's because it is," Sienna said without any particular emotion. "Or it was, before Arthur found the lower aquifer target." "Right," Leo said. "But Julian doesn't know that. He doesn't know the new well site has been identified. He doesn't know about the deposit." He looked at me. "What does he know?" "He knows the property has a subsurface feature worth pursuing," I said. "He's had that information for 3 years. He's been waiting for Sienna's financial position to deteriorate to the point where she'd accept a below-market offer rather than lose everything to the bank. So we help him think that moment has arrived," Leo said. Dale, who had been sitting with his arms crossed and his coffee untouched in front of him, uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. "You want to advertise that we're in trouble?" "Selectively," Leo said. "Not a press release, just the right information reaching the right ears through channels that look natural." He looked at Sienna. "Your operating loan is through Central Valley Agricultural Credit, right? I know the branch manager there, Dave Kellerman. I did equipment work for their facilities contractor 2 years ago. If word got out through that office that your water situation was still critical and your yield projections were down, it would look like normal loan review activity. Nobody would think twice about it." "That's a thin line," Sienna said. "Kellerman isn't going to spread rumors about a customer's loan status. That's a liability issue." "He doesn't have to spread rumors," Leo said. "He just has to have a conversation in a place where the wrong person might hear it. Julian's been watching this property, which means he's been talking to people who know this area. Land brokers, water district staff, agricultural lenders. Someone in that network is feeding him information." He looked at Dale. "You said the guy watching the north fence was wearing dress shoes." "City shoes," Dale said. "Not from around here." "Right. Which means Julian is using an intermediary, somebody local who knows the agricultural community well enough to blend in." Leo folded his hands on the table. "We don't need to find out who that is right now. We just need whatever that person hears to be what we want Julian to hear." The table was quiet for a moment. Outside, the irrigation pumps had shut down for the evening, and the farm had gone to its night sounds, the soft movement of wind through the almond canopy, a mockingbird somewhere near the equipment barn, running through its repertoire with tireless invention. Sienna looked at the pages Leo had spread on the table. She looked at them for a long time, the way she looked at her topographic maps, not reading them so much as thinking through them, using them as a surface for a thought that was already mostly formed. "If Julian comes," she said finally, "he comes with a purchase offer, below market, structured to look like he's doing me a favor." "That's how these things work," I said. "He'll frame it as a rescue, a way out before the bank moves. And he'll want to move fast," Leo added. "Once he thinks the moment is right, he won't wait. He's been sitting on this for 3 years. The minute he believes the window is open, he'll be on a plane." Sienna nodded slowly. "And when he gets here," I looked at her, "that depends on what we have ready when he arrives." She looked back at me steadily. "What do we need?" "2 things," I said. "First, we need the mineral rights for the fallow section formally established and on record. Right now, the deposit has no legal protection. If Julian acquires the surface rights, he could potentially argue claim over the subsurface depending on how the deed is structured. We need a mineral rights attorney to look at your father's estate documents and determine whether the rights were separately conveyed or are bundled with the surface deed." "Rebecca Yone," Sienna said immediately. "She handled my father's estate. She's in Fresno. Can you trust her? She's the one who kept my father's secondary coordinate logs, Sienna said. She's had them for 3 years and never once contacted me about them without my initiation. Yes, I trust her. Good, I turned to Leo. Second thing we need to know the moment Julian books travel to California. I don't know how to do that. Leo picked up his pale ale and took a drink. I might know someone. Guy I went to school with does cybersecurity work in Sacramento. Nothing illegal, but if Julian starts making inquiries about California property law or agricultural land transactions through public-facing channels, there are ways to see that activity. He set the bottle down. Give me a week. Dale had been listening to all of this with his characteristic stillness, turning his coffee mug in slow quarter rotations. Now he looked up. What do you need from me? Keep watching the north fence, I said. And if anyone comes to the property asking questions, inspectors, assessors, anyone you don't recognize, write down everything. Time, vehicle description, what they asked, what you told them. I don't tell strangers anything about this property, Dale said, with a flatness that made it clear this was not a new policy. Good, I said. Keep not telling them. The corner of Dale's mouth moved approximately 2 millimeters in what I had come to recognize as his version of a smile. Leo gathered his pages and closed the folder. There's one more thing, he said. If this works, if Julian comes and we're ready, we need someone with legal authority in the room, not just documentation. A person. He looked at Sienna. The FBI has a field office in Fresno. Wire fraud across state lines is federal. If what Arthur described happened the way he said it happened, there's a case there. Sienna looked at me. There's a case, I said. I have the original fraudulent prospectus, the operating agreement with Julian's signature, and the wire transfer records from the LLC account. I kept copies of everything before the bankruptcy trustee took the originals. I paused. I kept them in my field bag. Julian never thought to look for copies because he thought he'd covered the trail well enough that there was nothing worth copying. Leo looked at me with something that might have been admiration on a different face. On Leo's face it looked like quiet satisfaction, which was essentially the same thing. So, you've had evidence this whole time, he said. In a canvas bag under a cot in your farm equipment barn, I said, looking at Sienna. For the first time since I had known her, Sienna Brooks laughed a short, surprised sound that lasted less than 3 seconds, but was completely genuine, the laugh of a person caught off guard by something in the middle of a situation that has not given them much to laugh about. All right, she said when she had recovered. Leo talks to Kellerman, Arthur contacts Rebecca Yoon, Dale watches the fence. She looked around the table. We don't discuss this outside this room. Not on the phone, not by text, not to anyone who isn't sitting here right now. Dale stood and picked up his mug. Understood, he said, and carried it to the sink. Leo capped the remaining pale ales and stacked them in the refrigerator. I'll call you Thursday, he said to me, and then to Sienna. Thank you for dinner. I didn't make dinner, Sienna said. Dale did, Leo said. So thank Dale. Dale knows I'm grateful, Sienna said. From the sink without turning around, Dale said, I know. After Leo's headlights had faded down the access road and Dale had gone to lock up the equipment barn for the night, I sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes, alone with the folder Leo had left and the notes I had been making in my field notebook. The table where we had laid out our plans looked ordinary now, just a kitchen table in a farmhouse, a few rings from the beer bottles, the overhead light casting its familiar yellow circle. I opened the laptop and pulled up the email I had drafted the day before to an address I had not contacted in 2 years. I read it through, once changed one sentence, and hit send. The subject line read, Urgent consultation needed, mineral rights verification, Central Valley, California. The recipient was Rebecca Yoon, Esquire attorney, at Law Fresno, California. I closed the laptop and listened to the farm settle into its night sounds, and thought about a man in Texas who believed he was the only one who knew what was buried beneath 60 acres of dry California grass. He had been wrong about a lot of things. He was wrong about that too. The phone rang at 11:47. I know the exact time because I had been lying awake on the cot in the equipment barn room, watching the green digits on the alarm clock Leo had left for me, and 11:47 was the last number I had looked at before the buzzing started on the nightstand. Unknown number. Houston area code. I sat up and answered it before the second ring finished. Silence for a moment, then breathing. Then a voice I had not heard in 3 months saying my name in a register. I had not heard since she was 9 years old and had fallen off her bicycle in the church parking lot on Westheimer. Dad! My chest locked up like a seized engine. Chloe! I kept my voice level by force of will. Where are you? I'm at a Walgreens on Westheimer. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I borrowed a phone from the pharmacist. I didn't want to call from my own number. A pause ragged at the edges. I've been sitting in my car in this parking lot for 2 hours, trying to decide whether to call you. You called, I said. That's what matters. Are you safe? Yes. Julian's at a dinner in the Galleria. He won't be home until midnight at the earliest. She exhaled a shaky sound. I found something, Dad, in the house. I need to tell you, and I need you to just listen, because if I stop talking, I don't know if I'll be able to start again. I'm listening, I said. Take your time. She didn't take her time. The words came out in a controlled rush, the way words come when someone has been holding them back so long that the release is almost violent. 3 weeks ago, Julian reorganized his home office, she said. He moved his filing cabinet, and I found a panel in the wall behind it, a recessed panel built into the drywall. I never knew it was there. Her voice dropped lower. There was a small safe behind it. I knew the combination. I watched him open it once about a year ago when he thought I was in the shower. He didn't know I was standing in the hallway. What was in it? And it always by us. Documents, she said. A lot of them. Property records mostly. I didn't understand all of it, but I could see they were related to a farm somewhere in California, Fresno County. There were maps, geological-looking charts, a purchase agreement that had someone's name on it. A breath. Sienna Brooks. I did not say anything. I pressed the phone against my ear and waited. There was a folder with your name on it, too, Chloe said, and her voice cracked on the word your in a way that she tried to control and couldn't. Dad, he had a copy of the LLC operating agreement with your signatures. He had the patent assignment. He had the wire transfer confirmations from when the account was liquidated. All of it. Organized, labeled. Like he was proud of it. My jaw tightened. I looked at the dark ceiling above the cot and breathed carefully through my nose. I took photographs of everything, Chloe said. With my phone, I know that was risky, but I didn't know what else to do. I've been trying to figure out for 3 weeks what to do with them. Another shaky exhale. And then I found the other thing. Tell me, I said. At the back of the safe behind the folders, there was a camera, a dash cam, the kind you mount on a windshield. It was old, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and the casing was cracked like someone had forced it open at some point and then just put it back in the safe without fixing it. She paused. I almost put it back. I almost did. But something about the way it was hidden back there, the way it was separate from everything else. Her voice steadied. I took it to an electronics repair place on Richmond Avenue. I told them it was mine and I had dropped it. The technician said the external memory card was missing, but the unit had an internal backup chip. Apparently some older models had a secondary storage buffer for when the external card was full or missing. He said most people didn't know about it. I sat very still on the edge of the cot. He said there was data on the internal chip, Chloe said. He said he could extract it, but it would take a few days. That was 11 days ago. A beat of silence that felt like a held breath. Dad, he called me this afternoon. He said the data is intact. He said there's video footage on the chip. He hasn't told me what's on it. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I'm scared to find out, but I think I need to. I let out a slow breath and pressed my free hand flat against my knee to keep it from shaking. Chloe, I said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay? Does Julian know you found the safe? No. She said it immediately and firmly. I put everything back exactly as it was. I was careful. He doesn't know. A pause. I've been acting normal for 3 weeks, Dad. Do you understand what I'm saying? 3 weeks of sitting across the dinner table from him every night and acting like nothing happened. Her breath came faster for a moment. I'm so tired. The words landed in my chest like something physical. She was 26 years old, and she had spent 3 weeks eating dinner across from a man she had discovered was capable of things she was still trying to understand the full scope of. And she had done it alone without telling anyone because she had not known who to call or whether anyone would believe her. She had carried that the way you carry something with no handle pressed against your body, taking the whole weight on yourself. I believe you, I said. Everything you're telling me, I believe you. A sound came through the phone that was not quite a sob, something shorter and more compressed. The sound of a person who has been holding back tears for so long that when one finally escapes, it comes out as something smaller than it should be. I didn't know what to do, she said. After I sent that text, the one I sent you the day the foreclosure notice came, I thought I was protecting you. Julian said if you and I stayed in contact, it could complicate the legal situation, that you might try to bring a claim through family connections, and it would make things worse for both of us. Her voice hardened. I believed him. I believed him for weeks. You didn't know, I said. I should have known. The hardness in her voice turned inward sharp and self-directed. He had been telling me what to think for 2 years, Dad. About everything. About you, about Leo, about my own work, about what I was capable of. I kept thinking my perspective was wrong because he kept showing me reasons why it was wrong. She stopped. I'm not making excuses. You're not making excuses, I said. You're describing what happened. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed firmer, more like herself, like a signal that had been carrying too much interference finally coming through clean. I want to bring you the camera, she said, and the photographs. I want to look at what's on the chip, and I want you to see it with me. Yes, I said. I'll need to figure out how to leave without Julian getting suspicious. He checks our joint credit card account. I'd have to use cash for the flight. A pause. I have some. I've been pulling out small amounts for the past 2 weeks. Nothing that would flag on a statement. My daughter had been systematically, quietly preparing her own exit strategy for 2 weeks. She had been doing it alone in a house with a man who monitored their finances in a city where she no longer trusted anyone. She had done it the way a person does something when they have no margin for error, slowly, carefully, without telling a soul. I was in that moment more proud of her than I had words to say. How much cash do you have? I asked. About $400. That's enough for a flight to Fresno if you book through a discount carrier. Use a public terminal at the library or a FedEx store. Don't use your home computer or your phone browser. I thought for a moment. Can you get to a library tomorrow morning? I can say I'm going to the grocery store. He doesn't track my car, just the cards. Book the earliest available flight you can get for the day after tomorrow. Send me the confirmation number through this number, the one you're calling from now. Can you access it again? The pharmacist said I can come back tomorrow. Good. Text me the confirmation number as soon as you have it. I'll be at the airport in Fresno. A long exhale. Okay. Then quieter. Dad? Yeah. I'm sorry it took me this long. I looked at the dark wall of the equipment barn room and the strip of faint moonlight coming under the door, and I thought about 3 months and a text message with a period at the end of it, and I thought about a woman sitting in a Walgreens parking lot for 2 hours trying to decide whether to make a phone call. You called, I said. That's enough. The line went quiet. Then she said goodnight and the call ended, and I sat on the edge of the cot in the dark for a long time, holding the phone in both hands, thinking about a cracked dash cam in a hidden safe, and whatever it was that had been recorded on the chip inside it. Whatever it was, Julian had thought it was important enough to keep for 3 years. That told me something. She texted the confirmation number at 9:17 the next morning. I was in the equipment barn helping Dale sort irrigation fittings when the phone buzzed in my pocket. I read the text, showed it to Dale without explanation, and said I needed Leo's truck for the afternoon. Dale looked at the text, looked at me, and went back to the fittings without a word. By the time I had washed my hands at the outdoor spigot and found my jacket, the truck keys were hanging from a nail by the barn door that they had not been hanging from 20 minutes earlier. I drove to Fresno Airport and parked in the short-term lot and sat in the truck watching the arrivals door. The flight was on time. She came through the sliding doors at 6:43 in the evening, a backpack over one shoulder and a cardboard shipping box tucked under her other arm, the kind of box that office supply stores sell for moving files, with the lid taped shut and her initials written on the top in black marker. She was wearing jeans and a gray pullover, and her hair was down, and she looked like she had not slept properly in several weeks, which I suspected was accurate. She was thinner than the last time I had seen her. Her eyes moved to me the instant she cleared the door, the way eyes move towards something they have been looking for. I got out of the truck. She crossed the sidewalk and put her free arm around me and pressed her face against my shoulder, and I put my hand on the back of her head and held on. She did not make a sound. Her shoulders were rigid, the shoulders of a person who has been holding something up for too long and is not quite ready to set it down, Not yet, not in an airport pickup lane with cars moving past and strangers on the sidewalk. But she held on for a long moment before she stepped back and looked at me with her jaw set and her eyes dry and bright. "You look thin," she said. "So do you," I said. "Texas heat," she said, which was not an explanation but was the kind of thing you say when you need to say something ordinary to bridge the gap between the phone call in the dark and whatever comes next. I took the box from her and put it in the truck bed. On the drive south on the 99, she sat with her backpack on her lap and looked out at the valley as the light faded, and I let her look. After about 15 minutes, she said, "Tell me about where we're going." So I did. I told her about the farm, the almond trees, the water crisis, the fallow section. I told her about Sienna and Dale. I told her about Leo showing up with his folder of numbers on a Friday evening. I told her about the seismic surveys and what the equipment had found beneath 60 acres of dry grass. And I watched her expression move through several changes as the pieces connected. By the time we reached the farm gate, it was dark, and the almond trees were black shapes on both sides of the road, and Chloe was sitting very straight in the passenger seat with her hands flat on her knees. "He planned all of this," she said. "Before we even got married." "Yes," I said. "He used our family to fund it." "Yes." She looked out at the dark orchard for a moment. Then she said, "I want to see what's on that camera tonight." Leo was already at the farm. When we arrived, he had driven up from Tulare and was in the kitchen with Sienna, a technical manual open on the table between them, and what looked like a small circuit board and a set of precision screwdrivers arranged on a clean cloth. He stood when Chloe came through the door, and something moved across his face that was too complicated to reduce to a single word: relief and anger, and 3 months of not knowing all compressed into the 2 seconds it took him to cross the kitchen and put his arms around his sister. "Now, hey," he said. "Hey!" she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Her hands gripped the back of his shirt. Sienna watched from the table without speaking. When Chloe stepped back from Leo, they looked at each other for the first time, two women who had never met, connected by a thread of damage that ran through the same source. Chloe extended her hand. "Sienna Brooks," she said. "I'm Chloe. I'm sorry about your father." Sienna shook her hand. Her grip was firm and her eyes were direct. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it wasn't easy." Chloe set the cardboard box on the table. She peeled the tape back carefully and lifted the lid and took out the dash cam, a black plastic unit about the size of a deck of cards. Older model, one corner of the casing cracked and repaired badly with electrical tape that had since dried and curled at the edges. She set it on the cloth next to Leo's tools. "The technician in Houston extracted the video file onto this," she said, and placed a small USB drive beside the camera. "He said the internal chip had a 48-hour buffer. Whatever was recorded in the last 48 hours before the chip lost power is what's on there." Leo picked up the USB drive and turned it over once. "I can pull it up on the laptop," he said. He looked at Sienna. "You want to do this now?" Sienna looked at the USB drive. She looked at it for 3 full seconds without speaking, and in those 3 seconds I watched something pass across her face that she did not try to control. A tightening around the eyes, a brief compression of her lips. The expression of a person standing at the edge of something they cannot unsee once they see it. "Now," she said. Leo opened the laptop and inserted the drive. The file was a single video, 4 minutes and 17 seconds long. He angled the screen so that all 4 of us could see it and pressed play. I am not going to describe what was on it in detail. Some things do not need to be described in full to be understood. What I will say is the camera had been mounted on the dashboard of George Brooks's truck. The footage showed a stretch of 2-lane highway in the late afternoon light. Route 33, the signage was visible at the beginning of the clip, heading north out of Maricopa toward the valley. The road was empty except for one vehicle. It appeared behind the Brooks truck at the 20-second mark and closed the distance over the next 90 seconds with a deliberateness that was not the behavior of a driver in a hurry to pass. It was the behavior of a driver with a specific intention. The camera recorded everything that followed. When the clip ended, Leo closed the laptop. Nobody moved for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed the distant sound of the irrigation system cycling through its overnight program. The small sounds of a farm at night that had seemed unremarkable every other evening I had spent here, and now seemed very loud in the silence that followed 4 minutes and 17 seconds of video. Sienna had not moved since the clip began. She sat in her chair with both hands resting on the table, palms down, fingers flat, the posture of someone pressing themselves into a surface to keep from floating away. Her face was still. Not the controlled stillness of discipline, the stillness of the moments before. Something different. Something that came from below the level where discipline operates. Her eyes were fixed on the closed laptop. Leo looked at her. His jaw was tight, and a muscle worked in his cheek. "Sienna." She did not answer immediately. 5 seconds. 10. Then she drew in a breath that was long and slow and completely deliberate, the breath of someone deciding in real time how to carry something that is now going to be with them forever. "He was right behind my father's car," she said. Her voice was flat and precise, each word placed with the care of someone walking on uncertain ground. "He was right there, and he did it on purpose." Her hands pressed harder against the table. The tendons in the backs of her hands stood out against her skin. One breath, another. "He took everything," she said. "My father, my legs, 3 years of fighting to keep this land." She stopped. The muscle in her jaw worked once. "And then he tried to buy it from me." Chloe's hand moved across the table and covered Sienna's. She did not say anything. She just put her hand there and left it. Sienna looked down at Chloe's hand on hers. Something in her face shifted a microscopic movement, a small giving way around the eyes. Then she straightened her spine and lifted her chin and looked at me across the table. "Tell me we have enough," she said. "Tell me this is enough." "It's enough," I said. "Combined with the documents I've been carrying and the wire transfer records, this establishes criminal intent across multiple counts." I looked at her steadily. "We go to the FBI tomorrow morning." Leo was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call ahead," he said. "I know someone at the Fresno field office, a former classmate, works in the white-collar crime division." "Tonight," Sienna said, "nobody calls anyone outside this room." She looked at each of us in turn, and the look was not a request. "Tonight we sit with this, tomorrow we move." She said it the way her father had probably said things about this land, with the certainty of someone who has made a decision and is not going to revisit it. "Agreed," I said. "Agreed," Chloe said. Leo set his phone down. "Agreed." Outside, the valley night spread wide and dark over the farm, over the fallow section, over 60 acres of ground that had been keeping a secret for 3 years without knowing it was doing so. And in the kitchen of the Brooks farmhouse, 4 people sat around a table with a closed laptop between them, and nobody moved to leave for a very long time. Her email arrived at 6:04 in the morning. I had been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold going through the documents in my canvas bag for the 4th time, not because I had missed anything, but because going through them again was the only thing that felt like doing something useful at that hour. When the laptop screen lit up with the notification, I leaned forward and read it. 2 lines. I remember the Brooks file. I had been waiting for someone to call about it. Rebecca Yoon Esquire. I read it twice. Then I went and knocked on the door of the room where Chloe was sleeping. She was already awake. We left the farm at 7:30, Arthur, Sienna, and Chloe in Leo's truck, Leo following in his own vehicle. The drive to Fresno took 40 minutes on roads that were already carrying the morning's agricultural traffic, flatbed trucks loaded with equipment, water tankers, heading out to the orchards, the ordinary machinery of the valley starting its day. Nobody said much on the drive. Chloe sat between me and Sienna in the back seat and looked out the window, and Sienna sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes forward, and I drove and thought about 2 lines of email and what it meant that a woman who had been holding George Brooks's secondary coordinate logs for 3 years had been waiting for someone to call. Rebecca Yan's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Fulton Street in downtown Fresno. A mid-century building with good bones and a lobby that smelled like floor wax and recycled air. The elevator was slow. We took the stairs. She met us at the office door herself, which told me something. A woman who meets clients at the door rather than having a receptionist do it is a woman who makes her own assessments rather than delegating them. She was in her early 40s, compact and precise in her movements, wearing a charcoal blazer over a white shirt and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at the 4 of us in the hallway with the evaluating calm of someone who had been expecting something like this and had already decided how to handle it. "Ms. Brooks," she said, and shook Sienna's hand first, then mine, then Chloe's, then Leo's, in that order deliberately. She had understood in one look who this was about. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice," Sienna said. "This isn't short notice," Rebecca said. "Come in." Her office was organized with the precision of a person who worked across multiple complex matters simultaneously and could not afford to lose anything. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of binders, each labeled and dated. A large work table along one wall, with nothing on it except a manila folder, a legal pad, and 2 pens. She sat behind her desk and gestured to the chairs arranged in front of it. "Before you tell me anything," she said, "I want to tell you what I know, so you understand where I'm starting from." She opened the folder in front of her. "George Brooks retained me in 2018 to handle estate planning and property documentation. Over the course of our work together, he disclosed to me that he had identified a potential subsurface geological feature on the fallow section of the Brooks farm, in his words, something worth protecting. At his request, I prepared and filed a separate mineral rights conveyance document on his behalf, severing the mineral estate from the surface estate and placing it exclusively in his name and his heirs." Sienna sat very still. "I didn't know he did that," she said. "He asked me not to tell you until he had the geology formally assessed," Rebecca said. "He said he didn't want to raise expectations before he knew what he actually had." She paused. "He died before the assessment was complete. In the chaos of the estate process, the accident and your hospitalization, the debt restructuring the mineral rights conveyance got filed but never formally recorded with the county. It exists in the state system as a pending document. It has never been challenged because no one has ever attempted to claim the mineral estate on that property." She looked at Sienna directly. "Until now, apparently." "A man named Julian Vance," I said. "He's been planning to acquire the surface rights at below market value. He believes the mineral rights are bundled with the surface deed because he doesn't know about the separate conveyance." Rebecca's expression did not change. She picked up one of her pens and wrote something on the legal pad. "Tell me the rest," she said. So, we told her. All 4 of us in sequence, Sienna, first then me, then Chloe, then Leo. Rebecca did not interrupt except to ask 3 precise questions at specific moments, each one aimed at a gap in the legal chain of evidence that she had identified faster than I could have. She wrote steadily throughout, and when we were done, she set down her pen and looked at her notes for a moment. "All right," she said. "Here is what I can do and how fast I can do it." She turned the legal pad to face us. "First priority is formalizing the mineral rights recording. The conveyance document exists. I have it. I need to file a motion with the Fresno County Superior Court to complete the recording process, and I need to do it in a way that is fast enough to be in place before any purchase transaction is attempted on the surface rights." She looked at Sienna. "I'm going to file an ex parte motion that's an emergency petition asking the court to act without waiting for the standard scheduling process. The legal basis is that the property faces an imminent risk of fraudulent transfer, which, based on what you've told me, is demonstrably true." "How long will it take?" Sienna asked. "Standard quiet title action in California, 3 to 6 months, Rebecca said. Ex parte with an imminent fraud basis, I've seen courts act in 2 to 3 weeks if the documentation is clean." She looked at me. "Your geological survey data establishing the deposit value will strengthen the motion significantly. The court needs to understand what's at stake." "I can provide the seismic data and my professional analysis," I said. "I'll write it up as a formal geological assessment." "Good." She made another note. "Second, the FBI." She looked at Leo. "You mentioned a contact at the Fresno field office." "Former classmate," Leo said. "I texted him this morning. He said to come in this afternoon." "Before you do," Rebecca said, "I want to prepare a document summary that the agent can use as a roadmap for the evidence you're bringing. Federal wire fraud cases are built on paper trails, and the more organized that paper trail is when you walk in the door, the faster they can assess whether they have a viable case." She looked at Chloe. "The video file is the most significant piece. Combined with the fraudulent prospectus and the wire transfer records, you're presenting evidence of a coordinated criminal scheme across multiple states and multiple victims." "Is that enough?" Chloe asked. "For them to actually move on it?" "That's their determination to make," Rebecca said. "What I can tell you is that federal prosecutors like cases that come to them already organized. You're not asking them to find evidence. You're handing them a complete picture and asking them to act on it." She looked around at the 4 of us. "That is an unusual position to be in. Use it well." She stood, which signaled that the meeting was over, and that we had everything from her that could be given in a single sitting. She walked us back to the office door herself. At the door, she paused and looked at Sienna. "Your father was a thorough man," she said. "He did everything right with the mineral rights filing. He just ran out of time to finish it." She said it without sentiment, the way you say a fact that is also true about a person. "We're going to finish it for him." Sienna looked at her for a moment. Something moved in her face that she did not try to control. "Thank you," she said. "Come back Thursday," Rebecca said. "I'll have the ex parte motion ready to review." We took the stairs back down to the lobby and walked out into the Fresno morning, bright and dry, and already warming toward the day's heat. I unlocked the truck and we stood by it for a moment, all four of us in the ordinary parking lot light. Leo said, "FBI is at 2 o'clock. "We'll be ready," I said. The drive back to the farm was quieter than the drive in, but differently quiet, not the tight silence of people preparing for something uncertain, but the more open quiet of people who have just learned that the ground beneath them is more solid than they had thought. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched the valley scroll past and thought about a man named George Brooks, who had filed a legal document in 2018 to protect something he had found in his own earth and then had not lived to see it protected. We were halfway back to the farm when my phone buzzed on the center console. Unknown number, no area code I recognized. I picked it up at the next straightaway and read the message. "They know you've been to a lawyer. Pull back or the deal dies and the farm goes under." I read it twice. Then I set the phone back on the console and looked at the road ahead. Chloe saw my face. "What is it?" I handed her the phone without answering. She read it. Then she passed it to Sienna in the back seat. Sienna read it and passed it back to me. Nobody spoke for a moment. The valley stretched out on both sides of the highway, flat and enormous and indifferent, the way landscapes are when human arrangements play out against them. "Someone is watching us," Sienna said, not alarmed, stating a fact. "Yes," I said. "Someone close," she said. That message came within 2 hours of us walking into Rebecca's office. I kept my eyes on the road. The message had come from an unknown number. It had arrived within hours of our visit to a lawyer whose office address was not publicly associated with the Brooks farm. Whoever had sent it was not monitoring us from a distance. They were in the same professional network we had just entered. I pressed the accelerator slightly and watched the speedometer climb, and thought about who in the circle of people who knew about this property and this situation was still on the wrong side. The FBI's Fresno resident agency was not what I had pictured. I had expected marble floors and uniformed guards, the kind of architecture that announces institutional authority before you open the door. What we found was the third floor of an office building on Van Norden Avenue, a door with a small placard and a keypad entry, staffed by people in ordinary business clothes who looked like they had too much work and not enough hours. The carpet was gray. There was a rubber plant in the corner of the reception area that looked like it had been there since the Clinton administration. None of that made it feel less serious. The machinery of federal law enforcement does not require marble to function. Leo's contact met us in the reception area. Special Agent Dennis Coburn was mid-40s gray at the temples, with the compact efficiency of someone who had spent 2 decades sitting across from people under significant stress and remaining entirely unaffected by it. He led us to a conference room with a rectangular table, 6 chairs, a whiteboard, and a window that looked out over a parking structure full of afternoon light. He set a recorder on the table and told us it was standard procedure. We did not object. "Take me through it from the beginning," he said. "All of you in whatever order makes the most sense. I'll ask questions when I need to." We went for 90 minutes. Leo spread the documents in the order Rebecca had organized them. The fraudulent prospectus, first then the LLC operating agreement with Julian's managing member signature, then the wire transfer records showing $412,000 moving out of my retirement account in a single transaction, then the patent assignment, then the bankruptcy filing. Laid out in sequence on a federal conference table, the architecture of what Julian had done was visible in a way it had not been when I was living inside it. It was not complicated. It was a series of legal instruments, each one dependent on the one before it, each one signed by a man who trusted the person across from him. That man had been me. Chloe placed the USB drive beside the documents and walked Coburn through its provenance, the dash cam, the cracked casing, the internal chip, the technician on Richmond Avenue in Houston who had extracted the file. Coburn asked 3 precise questions about chain of custody. She answered all three without hesitation and produced the technician's written statement from her backpack, 2 pages signed and dated. My daughter had prepared for this meeting better than I had. When we finished, Coburn set his pen down. The wire fraud elements are well documented. Interstate financial fraud scheme, fraudulent instruments. Funds transferred across state lines. Solid foundation under Title 18. Section 1343. He tapped the USB drive once. This is the variable. Vehicular assault resulting in death is state jurisdiction, not federal, unless we establish it as part of a broader criminal enterprise. If we can connect Route 33 to the financial scheme, show the act was done to facilitate the fraud that changes the jurisdictional picture significantly. It was done to obtain geological data, I said. That data was used to construct the fraudulent prospectus that defrauded me. The act and the scheme are directly and sequentially connected. That's the theory, Coburn said. We'd need to establish it evidentiarily. He looked up. Tell me about the anonymous message. I read it aloud from my phone. He wrote it down word for word. Someone in your immediate professional orbit is passing information to Julian Vance, he said. That's what I concluded, I said. Leo opened his laptop on the table. The loan officer at the agricultural branch Sienna uses, Central Valley Agricultural Credit Visalia branch. He handled the operating loan review, full visibility into the farm's financial position, the yield projections, the water situation, everything. He turned the screen toward Coburn. I traced the origin of the message this morning. Prepaid carrier activation point in Visalia, California. Activated 14 months ago. Coburn looked at the screen. You did that this morning. Cybersecurity consulting on the side, Leo said without emphasis. Helps with the truck payments. Something moved in Coburn's expression, not quite a smile, but the face of a man controlling one. The loan officer's name, he said. Sienna said Martin Kellick. 14 months at that branch. Said he had agricultural lending experience in Texas. 14 months. Activated 14 months ago. Coburn stood. I need to pull his file. He left the room without further explanation. We sat in the quiet. Through the window, the parking structure held the full weight of a Central Valley August afternoon, the kind of heat that makes concrete look like it is breathing. Chloe turned her coffee cup in slow rotations. Sienna sat with both hands flat on her thighs, eyes forward, the posture she used when she was waiting for field instrument data to come back. Coburn returned in 9 minutes. He looked at his notes before he looked at any of us. Martin Kellick, he said. Licensed in California 14 months ago. Prior to that, licensed in Texas under the name Martin Kellis. 1 letter, different, middle name, on the filing. Previous employer in Texas, Vance Financial Consulting, sole proprietorship. He looked up. Julian Vance's firm. Closed 18 months ago, approximately 6 months before Kellick appeared in Visalia. The room went quiet in a specific way. I looked at the table surface between my hands. Martin Kellick had shaken my hand in the lobby of Central Valley Agricultural Credit 3 weeks after I arrived in California. He had been professional pleasant, asked thoughtful questions about the farm's water situation. He had looked me in the eye for the entire conversation. He had been reporting every word to Julian Vance before we reached the parking lot. The cold that moved through me was different from the cold in the fallow field. That had been discovery. This was the cold of understanding exactly how exposed we had been for how long, without knowing it. How do we handle this? Leo asked. Standard procedure is to bring Kellick in immediately, Coburn said. Voluntary interview, potentially a cooperation agreement testimony against Vance in exchange for consideration on his own charges. He paused. However, if we bring him in now, Vance finds out. He runs or destroys evidence. If you bring him in now, Julian finds out, I said. Almost certainly, Coburn said. He looked at each of us in turn. Using the window we have requires changing your plan entirely. Kellick knows your original plan. We restructure everything, so he doesn't know the details until it's too late for him to be useful to anyone. Leo leaned forward. We change the timing and the location. Feed Kellick a version that puts him somewhere else when it actually happens. He passes that version to Vance. Vance comes to California for a meeting that happens differently than he was told. And Kellick is in an FBI room before Julian ever walks through the door, Sienna said. Coburn considered this. I can't authorize a controlled environment for an overt act today. That goes upstairs. He looked at me. Can you hold your current position for 48 hours while I get authorization? Yes, I said. Go back to the farm, act normal. Don't contact Kellick. Don't vary your routine in any way he might be observing. He stood. I'll call you by Thursday morning. We filed out through the reception area and down the stairs into the August afternoon where the heat of Fresno pressed down on the sidewalk with the full authority of a Central Valley summer. Leo looked at me over the roof of the truck. We changed the plan, he said. We change everything, I said. In 24 hours. I got in and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The canvas bag was on the back seat. The USB drive was in Chloe's backpack. The seismic data was on the laptop at the farm. All the pieces were in place. The ground beneath us was solid. I just needed to make sure Julian Vance believed for a few more weeks that it wasn't. We were back at the farm by 6. Dale was waiting in the equipment yard. I told him about Kellick before Leo had finished parking. Dale listened without moving, then said, "The man from the bank. He came out here twice. I showed him the irrigation system, walked him through the East Block, told him everything." His jaw tightened. He picked up his tools and carried them into the barn and set them down harder than necessary. We ate soup standing at the counter. Nobody sat down. Then Leo spread his notes on the kitchen table, and we got to work. "Everything Kellick knows is now a liability," Leo said. "New location, new date, new sequence. Julian researches everything, so the escrow company has to be real, just not the one he expects. Coburn can have a controlled environment set within 72 hours. Kellick can't warn Julian if he's in an FBI room answering questions," I said. Chloe set her phone on the table. "Julian doesn't know I'm here. He texts me every day. If I call him tomorrow, tell him I've heard things are moving faster than expected. He'll trust it because it comes from you," Leo said. "He trusts everything that comes from me," Chloe said. The flatness in her voice sat over something very deep. "He has for 2 years. This is the last time." Nobody argued. Nobody offered to do it for her. "Urgency is the enemy of caution," she said. "That's what Julian used on Dad. It'll work on him for the same reason." She was right. We pulled the date forward 10 days. Sienna would call the bank in the morning, a real call creating a real record Kellick would see. Chloe would call Julian from Tulare by noon. We sat at that table until past midnight. Sienna drew the new timeline on graph paper and taped it to the cabinet. Leo emailed Rebecca. Chloe wrote out what she would say to Julian, read it twice, changed 2 words, folded it into her pocket. At 2:12 in the morning, my phone rang. Rebecca. "The court approved the ex parte motion. Mineral rights recorded as of 11:58. It's done, Arthur." I looked at Sienna. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then she opened them, looked at the timeline on the cabinet, and put a small check mark next to the first item on the list. "1 down," Leo said. 9 to go, Sienna said. For the first time since Houston, I felt something that was not quite hope, but was the thing that precedes it. Before I reveal the full payback plan and the exact moment my cunning son-in-law gets exposed, drop a comment with "still here" right below this video, so I know you're still walking this path with Arthur. Also, please note the upcoming events include some dramatized elements to heighten the suspense, which may not entirely reflect actual occurrences. If that's not your style, feel free to turn off the video right now. He came in on a Tuesday. Leo's contact flagged the manifest at 7:40, Vance J. Houston. Laui AH to Fresno, FAT. Connecting through LAX. Arrives 14:10. I read it and handed my phone to Sienna. She read it and handed it back. 10 days, she said. "You were right. Julian was right," I said. "He taught me how he thinks." We were in the short-term lot by 1:30. Leo had coffee. I had nothing. My hands were already as steady as they were going to get. He came through the sliding doors at 2:02. Dark suit, open collar, no tie, a deliberate choice for Central Valley agricultural context. Single rolling bag, expensive and understated. On his phone before the doors had fully opened, smiling at whatever the call was with the relaxed ease of a man who did not perform confidence but inhabited it. He had been right about most things for long enough that the belief had calcified into certainty. "He looks relaxed," Leo said. "He is relaxed," I said. "He thinks this is already done." A black SUV took him to the Marriott on North Blackstone. He had researched the area. He had researched the version of this situation that Kellick had described, not the one that actually existed. At 4:30, Chloe walked into the lobby. Plain blue dress hair, down phone, set to record in her purse. Legal under California. One-party consent for in-person public conversations. She had rehearsed 4 times the night before and told Leo at the end, "I've been having this conversation for 2 years. I know how it goes." Leo watched through a gap in the parking structure pillars. "She looks completely calm, Dad," he said. I looked at my hands. 10 minutes later, she's standing up. She kissed him on the cheek. He's watching her go. Chloe came back to the sedan, stopped the recording, looked at the concrete wall for 10 seconds. "He said by this time tomorrow, everything changes," she said. He brought the signed purchase agreement in his bag. His words, "It's just a formality at this point." She held up the phone. Leo took it with the same careful hands he had used on the USB drive. I looked at my watch. "Tell Coburn we're ready," I said. The reply came back in 2 minutes. 3 words. "Copy, we're set. 17 hours. I woke at 4:30 and did not try to go back to sleep. In Houston, those early hours had been hours of damage, replaying signatures, locating the exact moment I could have chosen differently. This morning, I used them differently. I went through the plan one final time, and then I got up and went to the kitchen. Sienna was already there. Coffee made looking out the dark window at the farm. "How are you sleeping?" I asked. 4 hours, she said. "Maybe 5. "Same." She turned her mug in her hands. "My father used to say you should sleep badly the night before something important. He said it meant you understood the stakes." She paused. I found a journal entry where he wrote about the year I was 17. We lost a quarter of the East Block trees to blight. He wrote that I cried for 20 minutes in the equipment barn and then came out and asked what we were going to do next. A breath. He said he knew then that I would be all right. He was right, I said, not to comfort her, because it was true. Leo and Chloe arrived at 6:15 with a bakery bag. We ate standing up. Nobody sat down. At 6:45, Dale came in from the barn and accepted the coffee Leo handed him without a word. He looked at Sienna. "Your father hired me because he said I was the kind of man who stayed," he said. "I want you to know that's still true." "I know, Dale," she said. At 7:15, we carried our things to the vehicles. Dale shook my hand, lasted holding it 1 beat longer than necessary. "Bring it home," he said. Sienna drove. It was right that she should be at the wheel on this particular morning. The valley fog burned off as the Sierra caught the rising sun, and we did not speak for a long stretch. Then she said, "After today I want to start the deposit assessment, the almonds and the oil operation running parallel. I'd need a geologist." "I know one," I said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. We reached Fresno. I saw the building on Fern Avenue from half a block away, unremarkable the way all the best traps are unremarkable. And then I saw Julian in the lobby, relaxed on his phone, facing away. Sienna cut the engine. We sat in the sudden quiet. 15 minutes, I said. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to this farm." I thought about the Greyhound at 3:14 in the morning. "Thank you for opening the gate," I said. We walked toward the building together. Julian saw me when I was 6 steps inside the lobby. I watched the recognition move across his face in sequence, the double take, the rapid recalibration, then the decision visible only as a slight settling of his shoulders. He was going to proceed. He still thought he could control the room. He extended his hand. I walked past it. The conference room was rectangular, 8 chairs, 1 window. Rebecca Yoon was already seated, a briefcase at her feet. The escrow officer FBI, though Julian did not know, it directed everyone to their places. Julian sat at the far end. Sienna sat across from him. I sat beside Sienna. Chloe came in last and took the chair behind Julian's line of sight. When Julian registered Chloe's presence, his expression shifted for exactly half a second. Then he reassembled. The land purchase agreement ran 41 pages. Julian had prepared it carefully, every exit ramp for the seller, closed every protection for himself, intact. It would have worked perfectly in any situation where the seller did not hold 60 acres of mineral rights worth $10 million. Garrett placed the document in front of Julian. Julian picked up his pen, looked at Sienna once with the calm of a man closing a transaction, and signed. The side door opened. Agent Coburn entered with his credentials case open. 2 agents followed. Behind them, a representative from the California Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources carrying a binder. Julian went very still. Rebecca placed the mineral rights recording on the table. Chloe placed the USB drive and her phone beside it. Coburn explained Kellick's cooperation agreement in 4 sentences. Julian's hand drew back from the table, the only undisciplined thing I had ever seen him do. Then he looked at me. "You came here with nothing," he said. "Yes," I said, "and I had a lot of help." The handcuffs closed with a sound smaller than I expected. Julian walked out between 2 agents without being told to move. Chloe sat back down and looked at her hands, and then looked at me, and for the first time since Fresno Airport, she looked like herself. Sienna picked up the mineral rights document and read her own name aloud. Sienna Eleanor Brooks, sole rights holder. She set it down. She looked at me. I nodded. She nodded back. Outside, the Central Valley spread wide and bright, going on further than you could see. The last person to leave the conference room was Sienna. Coburn and his agents had gone first, taking the document package and the USB drive and Julian Vance. Rebecca had followed, briefcase in hand, pausing at the door to tell Sienna she would call Thursday with next steps on the mineral rights transfer. Garrett had gathered the remaining paperwork with the quiet efficiency of a man for whom extraordinary events were simply events, and then he too was gone. Chloe and I waited in the hallway. Through the open door, I could see Sienna sitting at the table, with both hands flat on its surface, looking at the empty chair across from her, the chair Julian had occupied the place where he had set his pen down after signing the unremarkable piece of furniture where 3 years of planning had come to its end. She was not moving. She was not crying. She was doing the thing she did when she needed to understand something fully before she could carry it forward, sitting with it the way you sit with a geological problem when the data is complete and the answer is clear, but you need a moment before you write it down. I did not go back in. Some rooms need to be sat in alone. Chloe stood beside me with her back against the hallway wall and her arms loose at her sides. She looked at the ceiling for a moment and then looked at me. "He called me this morning," she said. "Before we left, checking in." She paused. I said good morning, and that I hoped his meeting went well. I looked at my daughter. She had held the shape of her marriage for 2 years, while it hollowed out from the inside. She had sat across dinner tables and answered normal questions and said good morning to a man she had come to understand fully, and she had done all of it without flinching until the moment she chose to stop. "What do you need?" I asked. She thought about it seriously, which was a Chloe thing to do. "Food," she said finally. "And then I need to talk to a divorce attorney." In that order, she said. Leo arrived from the parking structure at that moment, coming down the hallway with his hands in his pockets and his work boots loud on the tile. He looked at the 2 of us outside the conference room door. He looked at Sienna through the open door. He did not ask how it had gone. He could see how it had gone. He put his arm around Chloe's shoulders, and she leaned into him briefly and then straightened up. Sienna came out a minute later. She pulled the conference room door closed behind her, a quiet, deliberate sound. She looked at the 3 of us. "Rebecca says the mineral rights transfer is procedural at this point," she said. 60 days, maybe less." "Good," Leo said. She nodded. Then she looked at me. "Arthur, your attorney in Houston called while I was in there. I let it go to voicemail. You should listen to it." I took out my phone and played the message on speaker in the hallway of an ordinary office building in Fresno, California, on a Wednesday morning in late August. My attorney's voice, calm and precise, the asset freeze order on the Carter accounts had been lifted pending Julian's arraignment. Restitution proceedings were approved to begin immediately. The patent assignment executed under fraudulent misrepresentation was being challenged in the bankruptcy court and was expected to be reversed within 30 days. The Houston house remained in foreclosure proceedings, but with the fraud finding established, there were strong grounds for reversal. The message ended. The hallway was quiet. I stood in the middle of it with the phone in my hand and the California morning pressing through the window at the far end of the corridor, and I felt something move through me that was neither relief nor satisfaction, but was larger than both the specific feeling of a foundation that holds the feeling of ground under your feet that will not shift. Leo said, "Dad." I looked at him. He was smiling, which Leo did rarely enough that when he did it meant something. I put my hand on his shoulder. He put his hand over mine for a moment. That was enough. We walked out of the building together, the 4 of us, into the bright August heat of a Central Valley morning, and we stood on the sidewalk, blinking in the light, like people who have been inside a long time. I know a place in Fresno, Sienna said. Good food, nothing fancy. Open at 9. It's 8:53, Leo said, looking at his watch. Then we walk slowly, Sienna said. We walked slowly. The well driller finished on a Thursday in September. I was in the fallow section running the preliminary assessment paperwork when Dale came to find me walking fast across the dry grass with his thermos in one hand and an expression on his face that I had not seen before, something open, something that had released a pressure it had been holding for a long time. She's pulling, he said. Clean pressure, 12 gallons a minute. I set down my clipboard. 12 gallons a minute from the lower Tular Formation, 492 feet down, exactly where the seismic data had said it would be. Enough to run full irrigation cycles through a California summer without breaking. Enough to bring the fallow section into production within 2 seasons. I looked at the almond trees on the east block, the surviving ones, the ones that had made it through last summer, on insufficient water and sheer agricultural stubbornness, and I thought that George Brooks would have understood the specific satisfaction of that number. Chloe filed for divorce the following week. She did it in Houston with an attorney she had chosen herself in an office she had driven to alone. She texted me afterward 2 words. It's done. I read it standing in the farm kitchen and felt something that was not happiness exactly, but was the thing adjacent to it when the right thing finally happens. Leo drove up on weekends. He and Sienna spent most of those visits at the kitchen table, with topographic maps and extraction modeling software, building the framework for what they were beginning to call the integrated operation, almonds and oil, running parallel, neither one compromising the other. They argued about timelines and disagreed about infrastructure sequencing, and ate Dale's cooking and argued some more. It was, I thought, exactly the kind of argument that builds something. The assessment team from the licensed operator arrived in mid-October, 4 geologists and a drilling engineer who shook my hand and said they had read 2 of my papers on confined aquifer identification. I told them thank you and showed them the seismic data and got out of their way. One evening after the assessment team had gone for the day, and Dale had locked up the barn and the farm had settled into its October quiet, Sienna appeared at the door of the equipment room where I was organizing the survey files. She was holding something, a small book, dark leather cover, worn at the corners. I found this in the storage shed last week, she said. It's my father's last field journal. She held it out. The final entry is dated 3 days before the accident. She paused. I thought you should be the one to read it first. His handwriting was small, and even the handwriting of a man accustomed to writing in wind. I read it slowly, sitting on the bench outside the equipment barn, with Sienna beside me in the evening light. George Brooks had written about the fallow section in his last 3 entries, the structure he had found, the coordinates, his cautious excitement. He had written, I don't want to tell Sienna until I know what we actually have. She worries enough already, but this land has been good to us. I think it's not finished being good to us yet. The final entry was shorter. Drove to Bakersfield today for the survey filing, coming home on 33. Good light this evening. Thought about Sienna the whole drive. She cried 20 minutes in the barn last year over those East Block trees, and then came out and asked what we do next. That's her. That's always been her. The ground here holds more than almonds. She'll know when the time comes. She always did. I closed the journal. Sienna was looking at the almond trees in the last of the light, the rows running straight and dark toward the fallow section. Her hands were in her lap. She did not reach for the journal. He knew, she said. He knew, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going back to Houston? I looked at the fallow section, 60 acres of dry grass, above a geological structure worth $10 million, above 492 feet of clean water, above everything George Brooks had protected, and everything his daughter had fought to keep. No, I said. I don't think there's anything in Houston worth going back to. She nodded slowly. Leo needs a good geologist for the extraction planning. Leo has one, I said. The evenings settled around the farm, the way California evenings do in October, sudden and soft, the light going from gold to gray in the time it takes to have a short conversation. The irrigation system started its overnight cycle somewhere to the west, a sound I had come to know as well as my own breathing. Sienna reached out and took the journal from my hands. She held it without opening it. Thank you, she said, for reading it first. Thank you, I said, for trusting me too. She looked at me, once the same clear and steady look she had given me on the first morning at the gate in the last moment before she opened it. Then she turned back toward the farm. I stayed on the bench a while longer, looking at the ground between my boots. Somewhere beneath it, the earth held what it had always held: water and oil and the slow, patient record of everything that had ever happened above it. I had spent 40 years learning to read that record. I was not finished reading yet. People ask me what I learned from all of this, from the family betrayal that took my house, my savings, my patent, and very nearly my sense of who I was. I learned that the ground beneath you is more solid than you think, even when everything above it has collapsed. I learned that family betrayal does not define you, it redirects you. I learned that the people who stay, who show up before sunrise with 2 mugs of coffee and no questions, are worth more than anything a signature can transfer. I learned that God does not waste a broken season. He uses it to move you somewhere you would never have chosen to go yourself. I would never have chosen a cot in a farm equipment barn in California. I would never have chosen any of it. My advice to you: don't do what I did. Don't let wanting something badly enough feel like knowing it is real. Don't sign what you haven't read. Don't trust what you haven't verified. And when someone you love is asking too many helpful questions about your assets, ask one question back: why? This family story cost me everything I had built, but it gave me everything that mattered. If this family story reached you, if any part of Arthur's journey sat with you the way it sat with me, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements created for the purpose of reflection and understanding. If that is not what you are looking for today, we understand completely. Step away and find what serves you best. We will be here when you are ready.